Enforcement is where compliance is truly tested. Policies, procedures, and controls can look perfect on paper. But enforcement shows what actually works in reality. In crypto, enforcement cases rarely come out of nowhere. They are the result of repeated failures, ignored warnings, and risks that were known, but not addressed. Many firms believe that enforcement is about a single mistake. It is not. Regulators look at decisions, internal behavior, and who knew what, and when. This is why enforcement matters. It shows how responsibility and accountability are interpreted in crypto. And it explains why frameworks like MiCR and DORA were created. Enforcement does not start with a fine. It starts much earlier. Most enforcement cases follow the same path. A compliance gap appears. It is identified internally. And finally, it is tolerated. Risk assessments highlight weaknesses. Audits raise concerns. Compliance teams escalate issues. But business pressure delays action. Growth targets are prioritized. Controls are postponed. Temporary fixes become permanent. Over time, these gaps stop being exceptions. They become the operating model. Regulators act when risks were known, documented, and ignored. And when that pattern is visible, enforcement is no longer a question of if, but when. Not all enforcement is the same. Some cases end with fines and remediation. Others lead to criminal charges and prison sentences. The difference is not size. And it is not reputation. The line between civil and criminal enforcement is crossed when conduct becomes willful. Civil enforcement addresses negligence, weak controls, poor execution, failure to meet regulatory expectations. Criminal enforcement is different. It requires knowledge and intent. Did the firm know the activity was illegal? Did it allow it to continue anyway? Or worse, did it actively facilitate it? Four factors usually trigger escalation: intent, active facilitation, scale and duration, and obstruction of regulators. When those elements are present, enforcement moves beyond penalties. It becomes personal. This is where executives enter the picture. Corporate fines are not the end of enforcement. Increasingly, regulators go after people. Executives cannot hide behind the company. CEOs, founders, board members, and senior compliance officers. Approval is not required. Awareness is enough. Emails. Internal chats. Ignored warnings. These become evidence. When violations continue, liability becomes personal. Consequences escalate rapidly. Fines become criminal. Careers end. And prison becomes a real possibility. This is not theoretical. Real cases follow. BitMEX was one of the largest crypto derivatives exchanges in the world. It processed billions in trades, including from US customers. But there was a problem. No AML program. No customer due diligence. No monitoring. The founders knew. Internal communications showed clear awareness. In 2020, regulators acted against the founders personally. They were arrested and forced to plead guilty. This was not a civil fine. It was a criminal landmark. Operating offshore does not remove responsibility. And founders are not immune to the consequences. KuCoin is a global crypto exchange. For years, it processed massive volumes for customers worldwide, including users in the United States. There was just one issue. KuCoin operated without a compliant AML program. No meaningful KYC. No registration as a money transmitter. It was a massive oversight. Between 2017 and 2020, more than $9 billion flowed through the platform. In 2020, US authorities filed a criminal indictment instead of a settlement. The charges were filed not only against the company, but the founders individually. The case is still pending. The founders avoid travel to jurisdictions with extradition treaties. This explains why the EU chose MiCR, one rulebook and one accountable supervisor. Offshore may delay enforcement, but it does not eliminate the risk. Binance was not fined $4.3 billion by accident. This was not a single failure. It was a systemic breakdown. The settlement breaks down into three parts. First, $3.4 billion for Bank Secrecy Act violations and AML failures. Second, $968 million for OFAC sanctions violations. Internal guidance actively encouraged bypassing restrictions. Intent proven. Third, over $150 million for unlicensed money transmission. CZ personally pleaded guilty and paid a $50 million fine. He stepped down as CEO. This case redefined crypto enforcement. Binance is now the benchmark. Not every compliance failure is a crime. But there is a clear line between failing to prevent wrongdoing and actively facilitating it. OKX crossed that line. The issue was not simply weak controls. It was behavior. Employees provided guidance to bypass restrictions using VPNs, country info was misrepresented. When a firm helps customers evade controls, it becomes facilitation. And facilitation changes legal exposure. Internal communications became evidence, not policies, but what employees actually did. This is where civil risk turns criminal. Culture leaves a paper trail. Failure leads to fines. Facilitation leads to prosecution. Regulators are watching. Having the right tools does not guarantee compliance. Many crypto firms invest heavily in blockchain analytics, transaction monitoring, and sanctions screening platforms. Yet enforcement cases keep happening. Why? Because tools only generate alerts. People and processes decide what happens next. In multiple cases, regulators identified massive alert backlogs. Suspicious activity was flagged, but reviews were delayed. SARs were filed late, or not at all. The root cause was not technology. It was capacity. Growth outpaced compliance. Transaction volumes increased, but teams, procedures, and escalation paths did not. This is where compliance failure becomes operational failure. And this is exactly the risk DORA addresses. Incident handling, timely response, and operational resilience are regulatory obligations. The lesson is clear. Technology supports compliance. Governance makes it work. Tools don't fail. Systems do. A settlement is not the end of enforcement. It is the beginning of a much longer and more expensive phase. After major enforcement actions, firms are often placed under independent monitors. These monitors can cost between $5 and $20 million per year, for several years. Then comes remediation. Systems must be rebuilt. Controls redesigned. Policies rewritten. This alone can cost tens of millions. Compliance teams are expanded. New analysts are hired. Training becomes mandatory and ongoing. Many settlements also include deferred prosecution agreements. One mistake during this period, and criminal charges can be reopened. But the biggest costs are often invisible. Reputation damage. Lost banking relationships. Partnerships that quietly disappear. And management time diverted from growth to survival. The lesson is simple. The fine is just the entry fee. The real cost comes after. Every enforcement case looks different. Different companies. Different countries. Different companies. Different headlines. But the underlying patterns are almost always the same. Weak or incomplete KYC programs. Known risks left unaddressed. Alerts generated, but not reviewed. Or reviewed too late. Compliance teams sidelined. Overruled. Or ignored when growth was at stake. In nearly every case, regulators point to the same issue: management knew, or should have known. Rapid growth without proportional controls is not seen as innovation. It is seen as negligence. And once regulators identify these patterns, the outcome is predictable. Cases change. Names change. But enforcement logic does not.